To check out all our products, go to musicnomadcare.com. Hey, it's Rand with Music Nomad. This video is designed to show you how to set up your guitar using Music Nomad's Keep It Simple setup method. The KISS process uses our precision gauges and tools combined with step-by-step general guidelines anybody can follow and set up their guitar to play and sound great. To get the job done right, you will need our 6-piece precision gauge set that includes a truss rod gauge and pick capo, string action gauge, radius gauge set, nut height gauge, and a 24-page instructional booklet. All of these uniquely designed to make the process much easier and precise than other gauges out there. The 3 Music Nomad tool sets are a 26-piece Guitar Tech screwdriver and wrench set, 11-piece truss rod wrench set, and a diamond-coated nut file set. With these 4 kits, you are able to set up most all guitar and basses out there. Before you get started on your setup, there are some pre-setup steps you should do. Remove all your strings with the Music Nomad grip cutter. With the strings now off, and with the Music Nomad radius gauge, measure and make a note of the fretboard radius, as you will need this info when you measure the string radius in the setup process. Tighten all screws, including the tuning machine bushings, with Music Nomad's Guitar Tech tool set. Polish your frets with Music Nomad's Fine Fret Polish. Clean and condition the fretboard with Music Nomad's F1 oil. Clean the body and neck with Music Nomad cleaners. Finally, put new strings on with Music Nomad's grip winder. Okay, now you're ready to start the setup, featuring our talented guest guitar tech who will lead you through the process. Have fun.
Hi, Jeff Luttrell here from San Francisco Guitar Works and Sonoma County Guitar Works. Setting up this beautiful Martin D28, it's a 2003 model, using the Music Nomad Keep It Simple setup system. With the goal of making setups accessible to everyone, my collaboration with Music Nomad has created a simple setup process to help you make your guitar play and sound great. So now that you've completed your pre-setup steps, we are going to go ahead and get started with the setup process. Now the flow will go as follows. We're going to start by setting our neck relief. We're going to move on to set our bridge radius and action height. Then we will cut our nut slots correctly. And on an acoustic guitar, you're done. We don't have pickup heights to adjust, and we don't have an adjustable saddle set up for intonation. We can check our intonation, but without modifying the saddle top, you aren't going to be able to easily change it. So we'll get started with the measuring process, beginning with our neck relief. So let's talk a little bit about neck relief. Neck relief is the amount of curvature that the neck has from front to back. If you imagine the strings are straight and the neck is curved underneath like a hammock, or it curves away from the strings, that is relief. If the neck is dead flat, it's exactly the same as the strings, then you would say that the neck has no relief. And if the neck is bent backwards so that it has a hump in the middle or is bowing up towards the strings, you would say that the neck has back bow. Now, why does a neck even need relief? Well, if you have a dead flat neck, you're going to have to raise your action height in order to create clearance for the string to vibrate. Just the physical reality of the guitar is you have a string that's oscillating. It's generally in an oval pattern. It's fixed on the ends. It's vibrating most in the middle. If you have a flat neck, you have to raise the bridge up in order to create clearance for that vibrating string. If you put a little bit of relief in the neck, you create a pocket for that string to have some clearance in order to vibrate without hitting the frets. So a little bit of relief will allow the instrument to have a much more even action height from the nut to the last fret. You don't want too much. You don't want a huge amount, because then you have high action in the middle of the neck. You don't want too little, because you can get buzzing in the low registers without having excessively high action. So the right amount of relief is really important for proper playability on any instrument. So in order to measure my neck relief, I'm going to use my Music Nomad pick capo and my truss rod gauge. So the pick capo is a cool little capo that fits over the E string, under the A string, and over the D, right at the first fret. And that's going to hold my E string down on the first fret, so I don't have to fret it, because we're going to take this measurement with the string fretted at the first fret. I'll use my truss rod gauge to measure the actual space between the 6th fret and the string. We have 3 gauges in the Truss Rod gauge set. One is for electric guitar, one is for acoustic guitar and bass, and one is for classical guitar. That's a 6/1000 of an inch thickness, 8/1000 and 10/1000 respectively. So you don't have anything more than what you need. The gauge is very clearly marked for what instrument it'll be used for. Additionally, on the handle, you have some instructions about how to actually use the gauge. If you forget, do I fret at the 12th fret? Do I use a capo? What do I do? All that's clearly marked on the gauge. And then on the other side of the handle is the touch rule for how to adjust your truss rod depending on what you find when you measure the relief. So it shows that if I measure my relief and I have no touch between the gauge and the string, I'm going to turn my truss rod clockwise to the right and tighten it to take relief out of the neck. If I have a very light touch, I'm good to go and I don't have to do anything. If I have a heavy touch, it's very hard to get the gauge between the string and the fret. I'm going to loosen my truss rod and put relief into the neck. So just some handy reminders to keep you on track as you're taking these measurements and making your adjustments. So I'm going to grab my 8/1000 of an inch gauge, which is for acoustic guitar. I'm going to put my guitar in the playing position. You always want to take your measurements in the playing position. Laying the guitar back on the cradle cube will flex the neck a little bit, and it will make your measurements not accurate whenever you are actually playing the guitar. So I'll put the guitar in the playing position. I've got my pick capo in. I'm going to fret at the 12th fret, and then I'm going to use my 8/thou gauge, and I'm going to measure between the 6th fret and the low E string. And this has got what I would consider kind of a medium touch. It's a little too tight. So I'm going to loosen my truss rod just a bit and add relief to the neck till I have just the perfect light touch between the gauge and the string. So I will grab, Martin uses a 5mm truss rod. This is a Music Nomad 5mm wrench specifically for Martin guitar. This doesn't come in the 11-piece truss rod kit, but you can buy it separately. So I'm going to go ahead and put the truss rod wrench down into the truss rod nut, which is located in the sound hole under the fingerboard extension. Now you might wonder how a truss rod works. A truss rod is a metal rod that goes through the back of the neck. It is an anchor. On this guitar, it has an anchor towards the headstock end and a threaded nut on this end. Gibson is flipped around the other way. Fender could be either, depending, but it's either going to be a headstock adjust or a heel adjust. When you tighten the truss rod, it shortens the rod and it pulls the neck back against string tension. If you loosen the rod, it allows the rod to lengthen and it allows the strings to pull the neck up into more of a curve. So if you imagine the neck is flimsy, the strings are trying to pull it up, the truss rod's trying to pull it back. So tightening the truss rod, it goes back and flattens. Loosening the truss rod, it goes up to more relief. So I'm going to loosen this truss rod just a bit. So I'm going to go counterclockwise, just a hair. Pull that out. You want to be very careful whenever you're going in and out of the sound hole. You don't want to ding the wood on the edge of the sound hole with the wrench. It's easy not to, but it's easy to do it if you aren't paying attention. So just be careful there. Now that I've made that adjustment, I'm going to put the guitar back in the playing position, and I'm going to remeasure. And that is perfect. I mean, it's just barely touching the string. So I know I'm right at 8/1000 of an inch. So now we have the first step of our setup done, which is adjusting the neck relief. What's nice about the Keep It Simple setup system is that once you've made an adjustment on one part of the guitar, the adjustments you make after that are not going to impact what you've already done. So we start with the neck relief because our bridge adjustments and our nut height adjustments are not going to affect that adjustment. So we do it once, then we move on. You don't have to do it again. There's no round and round trying to get your setup dialed in. You just take it one step at a time and you end up with a great playing guitar. So once we've got our neck relief adjusted, we're going to want to measure our saddle radius. The saddle radius needs to match the fretboard radius. Martin is really good about this. I mean, their fretboards are 16-inch radius and their saddles are usually really, really close. But I'm going to go ahead and measure just to make sure. Maybe this has an aftermarket saddle, maybe it's been worked on at a shop that didn't pay attention, they made a new saddle, they got the radius wrong, you just never know. So I'm going to go ahead and measure that and make sure that my radius is correct, and if it's not, we can correct it. So I'm going to use my radius gauge. This is another cool tool in the gauge set. The radius gauges are, there's 2 in each set, and they come in all the common fretboard radiuses from 7 1/4, which would be a vintage Fender, on up to 20, which would be some shredder guitars and some flatter neck profiles. It has everything in between. There are some instructions on the gauge that remind you how to use them. Your string radius at the bridge is going to match your fretboard radius when you're done with your setup, and you measure your string radius about a 1/4 inch in front of the saddle. That's a really commonly asked question in my class. Where do I put the gauge? And this reminds you, just about a 1/4 inch in front of the saddle. And then on your fretboard radius, you measure with the strings off, and you measure at the last fret. So if you forget kind of what to do, all the information is on here. Additionally, you can check out your fretboard radius by brand of guitar at musicnomadcare.com/how-to-advice. If you want to see the database of most guitars. Martin is really good about this. I mean, their fretboards are 16-inch radius, and their saddles are usually really, really close. Another thing I really like about these setup gauges is the black finish. I've used many other kinds. Mostly they're silver. It can be kind of hard to see a contrast between the string and the gauge, but with the black, it's really easy to see if there's any space between the string and the radius gauge. So, just trying to make things a little easier to see, a little easier to use, make every step of the process a little bit easier for you. So I'm going to take my 16-inch gauge and I'm going to put it down on the strings right in front of the saddle. One thing is you can gently push the gauge up and down, and you can look at each string individually and see which strings are bouncing and which strings are not. Like this one, I can't really push it up and down. It's super solid because it's resting on all 6. But if it was only on a couple of strings, I could push and I would see those strings moving up and down. So that's one way to make it a little easier. Another way is you can rest gently on the strings, and you can pluck each string individually and listen for what's hitting and what's not. And all 6 of these are buzzing on the gauge. So I know that the gauge is touching all 6. If I had a low string, it would just ring out. And then as I push the gauge up and down, I might be able to hear it hitting the string like that. So there's a couple of different ways that you can determine if your radius is correct. Let's pretend for a moment that the radius was incorrect. What would I do? So there are a couple of ways that you can address an incorrect radius on the top of your saddle. One is just take it down to your local guitar repair shop and have them take care of it for you. If you're more enterprising than that and you want to try to take it on yourself, you can buy a radius block that is a 16, and then you can radius the top of the saddle using that radius block. You then have to recrown the saddle, and if it's compensated like this one, you have to redo your compensation point. So it starts to get a little bit tricky. If you don't have a radius block, you could, if you just have a sanding block or sandpaper, you could just use your radius gauge, look at the saddle, and just sand off what you need to make it a 16. So, but the bottom line is the only way to correct the radius on the top of the saddle is to sand it to the correct radius, and then you have to reshape the top of the saddle, whether you just do a rounded profile like a vintage guitar or you do a compensated profile like a more modern guitar is up to you. But you have to sand it and you have to reshape the top of the saddle. So now I'm going to measure my action height. We have on our string action gauge, which is probably my favorite tool of the gauge set. They're all really nice, but this one's pretty slick. This is a black background with white etching, first of all, so you can actually see it. The silver background with the black etching, I've never had a great time seeing that. This is so much better. I really, really like it. This has measurements in metric, thousandths of an inch and in 64ths, so no matter how you like to measure your guitars, we've got those measurements on here. On each side of the gauge we have a chart that shows you the most common action measurements for electric guitar, acoustic guitar, and bass, from what we would call a low action up to a high action and several in between. So you can look on this chart here, and I'm going to do my measurements in inches, and I'm going to look at my chart and I'm going to see my finger style most common is a low action, which is 70 thousandths on the bass side and 60 on the treble. And I'm going to see that my most common action for just a general strummer, somebody who's playing a bunch of different styles, would be 90 thousandths on the bass side and 75 thousandths on the treble side. So I'm going to use that action spec on this guitar today. There are a couple of other things on this gauge that I won't be using on this guitar, but that are handy. There's a pickup height measuring scale on the corner. So if you have an electric guitar, you can measure your pickup heights really easily with that. And there's a conversion chart also from fractions to decimal inches and millimeters. So that'll help you if you are a metric user and you want to measure it in inches, you can convert. So in order to measure my action height, I'm going to put the guitar back in the playing position. So in order to take my measurement, I'm going to fret at the first fret, and I'm going to put my gauge behind the low E string, and I'm looking for what line corresponds to the bottom of the string at the 12th fret. So an easy way to do this is you can take your 20 thousandths line and put it right on the 12th fret. All right, so measuring my action here, I've got 70 thousandths on the bass side, and I'm sitting at about 55 thousandths on the treble side. So I'm a little bit low on the treble side, but I'm good on the bass side for a fingerstyle player. But we're not setting this guitar up that way. We're going to set this up for a more common, just all-around acoustic action. So I'm going to need to shim my saddle up. So although on this guitar we need to raise the saddle in order to make the action what we want, it's very common on acoustics to have very high action. So many need to have material taken off the bottom of the saddle in order to bring the action down to the desired height. We have a video on how to bring your saddle down in the link below. So check that out if you have any, if you need to bring your saddle down rather than up. Lastly, you may have to do both. You may have one side that's way too low and one side that's way too high. And so you may have to shim up to bring the low side to the desired height, and you may have to sand down the side that's too high. So you might have to do a combination of the two, but you always have to shim up to get to the proper height, and then if something else is too high, you're going to have to bring that down. So that's pretty common also, so you might have to do a little bit of both. If any of this saddle work, seems a little bit complicated, or you don't have access to the right tools to do it properly, any competent local tech or shop should be able to help you out with it without any trouble. So I'm going to use this 20 thousandths thick fiberboard veneer to shim this saddle up. I'm going to cut 2 strips and put them underneath the saddle, which will get me up to my 90-75 action that I'm looking for. So I've done this a million times. So I'm just going to eyeball a straight strip that should drop right into that saddle slot. I'm going to cut a thin piece. Just cut that off. Cut one more here. When you're cutting your strips, they need to be narrow enough to fit down in the saddle slot, but you don't want them too skinny. I mean, you want to try to get them as close to a good fit on the saddle as you can. If you have a piezo element underneath your saddle, I usually would put a shim under the piezo element, not between the piezo and the saddle. That keeps a good coupling between the saddle and the piezo element itself, rather than putting a piece of material between the two that could dampen the tone or cause uneven string output. So now that I've got my shims cut, I'm going to cut them to length. So I'm going to want them to be the same length as the saddle. It's about this long. They can be a little bit shorter. They've obviously got to fit into the slot, so you want to make sure that they're going to fit down in. That's about perfect. So now I will detune my guitar, and I will pop my bridge pins and pull my saddle out. After you've loosened your strings, put a capo on at the first fret, and that's going to keep your strings from unwinding off of your tuners and flying all over the place. Then you get your bridge pin puller, pop your bridge pins out. So this is the Music Nomad bridge pin puller. This thing's really great. It has a hard plastic area that grips the pin really well, and it's really comfortable with a grippy rubber handle. You can use it just to basically lever the pin right out of the hole. It's like with a little rolling action, just levers it up, or you can put it on and just pull straight up and it'll come right out. So now I'll get my strings out of the way, and I'm going to pull my saddle out. You might need to grab a set of end nippers to do that. And then I will put my shims down in the saddle slot. And this guitar does not have a pickup, so I don't have to worry about any interference with the piezo element. If you find that you have to shim your saddle up, more than, say, 30 or 40 thousandths of an inch, or if your saddle slot is very shallow, you may have to make a new saddle. You don't want this saddle so far up in the slot that it's going to tilt forward. So always be sure that your saddle, technically you should have about as much out of the top as you do in to the bridge, but you will just want to make sure that your saddle is well supported. So don't just shim it up till it's barely in the slot. This is a totally fine amount of shim to put in this. You got plenty of saddle down in the bridge. It's well supported. So I'm going to go ahead and put my strings back in. Let me grab my bridge pins. When you're putting your strings in on an acoustic guitar, you want to make sure that the ball end of the string goes down and contacts the bridge plate, but it's not hung up on the bottom of the pin. The pins don't really hold the string down. What they do is they hold the ball end of the string forward so that it catches the bridge plate, and that's what keeps the string from flying up out of the bridge. What can happen is as you're pushing your string in, is that the pin pushes the ball past the bridge plate, and then whenever you start tightening your string, it pops the pin out. So you just want to make sure as you're putting your string in, you're not pushing the ball end way down in. It's actually stopping at the bridge plate. So now we'll go ahead and tune this to pitch. Okay, and so since I needed to come up 20 thou on each side, and I put 40 thou of shim in, I should be exactly at 90 and 75 on this guitar. So let's take a quick measurement. And boom, that is definitely 90. And we are spot on 75. So math, it works. You just remember anytime you're going to shim the saddle up or take material off, 10 thou at the 12th fret requires 20 thou at the saddle, whether you're coming up or going down. So now we've gone through our neck relief, our bridge or saddle radius, our action height, and now it's time to cut the nut slots. The nut is very important on the guitar. It governs several different parameters. It governs the feel of the action at the first fret, whether it feels high or whether it's buzzy if it's too low. It's string spacing, so how the first fret position feels to play chords. It has a huge impact on tuning stability. If the nut slots are cut too tight, the string will bind in the slot and will cause tuning problems. If the slots are cut way oversized, the string could buzz in the nut slot. And if the nut slots are cut too high, you can have, not only is the playability poor, but you can have intonation issues because the strings are pushed down an excessive amount, raising their pitch before they get to the first fret, and it can cause intonation problems. So making sure that your nut is cut correctly will have a huge impact on the way that your guitar plays, both the feel of the instrument and the sound and the tuning. So we're going to go ahead and measure the string heights at the first fret, and I'm going to do that using my nut height gauge. So this is very similar to the truss rod gauge in that it's a set of feeler gauges. This comes graduated from 12 to 22 thousandths of an inch in 2 thousandths of an inch increments. Now these gauges are labeled. The 20, 18, and 16, those are the most common string heights that you'll use at the first fret for guitar or bass. And they're labeled. Your 20 thousandths is going to be my low E and A string on a guitar. So this will be my low E and A. I'll use the 20. I'll use my 18 for the D and the G, and I'll use my 16 for the B and for the high E. This has a, like the truss rod gauge, it has a touch rule for if you measure and it does touch the string and the fret, you're going to leave your nut slot alone. It's low enough. And if it doesn't buzz, you're okay. So that's kind of the break point on nut height. If the open string does not buzz, then the nut slot is not too low. So you might find as you're measuring your nut heights, wow, my nut slots are already cut lower than the gauge recommends, but I don't have any buzzing on the open strings. So that's totally fine. You just have a guitar that plays with nice low action. Basically, you can cut a nut slot just until above the buzz point, and that is completely okay. So cutting it down to just above the buzz point, you just don't know where the buzz point is. So the heights that we've recommended are safe. Like if you cut to the recommended heights, your guitar is going to play in tune, it's going to play comfortably. It's not going to, the open strings aren't going to buzz. I mean, that said, you can make anything buzz if you try, but just under normal playing for the average player, they're going to play totally clean. If you decide that you want to try to go a little bit lower than the recommended spec, we have supplied gauges that are thinner, so you can incrementally go down. And, you know, I mean, if you're daring, you can just keep going until it buzzes, but then you have to fill the nut slot. So I'd recommend sticking with the measurements that are on the gauge, and you're going to have a guitar that really will play very comfortably and will play in tune well. There's also on the inside of the handle, there is a little description of how to use the gauge. So if you forget, it's in there for you. So I'm going to go ahead and put the guitar in the playing position, and I'm going to get out my 20 thousandths gauge, and I'm going to measure my low E and my A string nut height. I've got a tiny gap there on the low E, and I've actually got a tiny little gap on the A, so I'm going to need to drop those two strings just a bit. I'm going to measure my D and G while I'm at it. Just kind of get a picture of where I am on all this. Now my D is definitely lower than the gauge, but it's not buzzing, so I'm not going to have to worry about that. It's not much lower, but it definitely is a little bit lower. So let's come in here. The G is also a little bit lower. Now let me measure my, my B and E. This guitar may only need the E and the A string cut, but we'll see. Yeah, we're definitely lower, not by much, but we're a little lower on the B and the E string also. But you can just check and make sure that your strings are all ringing clearly. Those strings are all ringing out fine. The D, the G, the B, and the E are all ringing out clearly. They're a little bit below the gauge. I'm not going to need to cut those. As you're cutting your strings, you'll want to remeasure each string as you go, just to make sure that you know what you're doing as you progress. But you know, if you want to just get a global overview, you can measure them all at the beginning. So now I'm ready to cut the nut slots on the E and the A string. I don't need to do a lot of work on these, but they do need to come down just a bit. When you're choosing nut files to cut your string, you want to choose a file that's the same size as the string gauge you're using, or up to 3 or 4 thousandths larger will be okay. This guitar has a set of 12 to 53 lights on it. So on my low E, I'm going to use a 56 gauge file, and on my A, I'm going to use a 42. I'm going to be using the Music Nomad diamond coated nut files, which I really like. They cut super smooth. They have a diamond coating on a rounded surface, so you get a perfectly rounded string slot. The diamond coating cuts very smoothly. I mean, you don't have to polish the slots after you cut. There's no chatter like with a normal file. The handles are really comfortable. If you find that you have a really tight clearance, You can pop the file out of the handle and just use it without. It's also really surprisingly easy to use for such a small file. So you have a lot of options there. So I'll be using the 56 file on my low E, and I'll be using my 42 on my A string. My low E is a 53, so a 56 will be fine. My A is a 42, so I'm going to use a 42. So when I'm filing nut slots, I like to stand over the guitar so I can see down on the nut. I like to be able to see that I'm filing in a straight line with the string and that I'm not moving the string from one side to another. I've had students try to get down and look at it from the side, and yeah, you can see your angle, but you can't really see what you're doing. And I find that just holding the file in my hand with my index finger on the tip, I just have a lot more control over the file itself. So since cutting the nut is a very delicate operation, you want to be sure that you're setting yourself up for success by holding the tools properly and ergonomically getting yourself into a position where you have control and you can execute this step properly. On this, I measured probably just a couple of thou higher than the 20 gauge, so I'm not going to need to come down a lot. So I'm going to go ahead and take out my low E string. There are a couple of little tips here if you're having trouble. Maybe you've never cut a nut slot and you're really worried, like, am I gonna blow it? Am I gonna cut too low? Which is possible. If you're careful and take it slow, you'll be fine. So I'm going to take my string out of the nut slot. On the outer two E strings, particularly on Martins or Gibsons, any guitar with a 3x3 headstock, you want to be sure to loosen your outer E's before you take them out and take them out of the nut slot and put them to the side. If you don't loosen the strings, you'll ding up the lacquer on the headstock, and nobody wants that. So I'm going to go ahead and loosen my low E so I can pop it out of the nut slot. It's going to lay on the side of the headstock, but that's fine as long as the string is loose. So if you're a little nervous about cutting the slot, you want to make sure you know what kind of material you're taking off. On the larger string slots, you can use a pencil, and you can put some pencil in the bottom of the slot, and that just darkens the spot where the string is resting. And then whenever you start cutting, you can take just a couple of strokes and then look and see what you've removed. So you'll know, is your angle too steep? Is your angle too shallow? It'll just give you a little bit of a guide as you get started. So you're going to want to cut at a little bit of a downward angle, not quite as much as the headstock angle, but definitely more of an angle than the fretboard, a couple of degrees, because you want the string to leave the nut at the front edge. So it needs to come up from the back, go up a slanted nut slot, and then leave cleanly from the front edge of the nut. So I'm going to take my nut file, going to put it in the slot. I'm just going to give a couple of quick strokes. And I took material off of the front of the nut. Immediately I can see that the front of the nut has been altered. So I'm going to put the string back in, and I'm going to double check my height. Okay. So let's get in here and see. So that's all it took. I am right on the money on the 20 gauge. It slides in really easily, but I don't have any play between the gauge and the string. So let that show you how little work you might have to do to take a nut slot down. I mean, you definitely need to apply a little pressure on the file, move it back and forth enough that it cuts, but take it easy. You can always do more. So slow and steady wins the race on that one. So now I'll double check my A string, and yep, I have that little gap there. Just kind of gives me a little bit of an idea of how much material I think I'm going to have to remove. Now on the A and the strings inside, you can usually just pop them out of the slot and move them to the side. If you have a softer nut material, you might mar the top of the nut, so if you want to loosen it, that's totally fine too. But this Martin nut material is very hard on this guitar. I don't think we're going to have any problem. So now I'm going to take my 42 file, and I'm going to put that in the slot. I've got my little bit of an angle on that, and I'm just going to give a little back and forth. See a little dust there already, and I know that I don't have a lot of material to go to get that down to the proper height. So now I'll put it back in playing position. Got just a little bit of gap there. I don't think it's really any that anybody would notice, but I noticed, so I'm going to go ahead and cut it down just a little bit more. And again, I saw a little dust come off the nut, so I know that I made a change there. Now I'm going to put it back in the playing position, double check, and yeah, that's good. It just slides in really, really gently without any gap between the string and the gauge. So I got off kind of easy on this one. I mean, you'd be surprised how many guitars I see that have excessively high nut slots, all 6. So if you pull your guitar out and you measure and you're like, God, all of these are way above the gauge, it happens. So, you just have some work to do. But these diamond-coated nut files make it really easy to consistently and evenly cut the slots down to the proper height. We've done our neck relief, we've set our bridge radius, we've set our action height, and we've cut our nut slots correctly. So now lastly, I can just check my intonation to see if it's grossly out. Should be pretty close with a compensated saddle, but I'll go ahead and just put my tuner back on. So intonation is the adjustment that makes the fretted notes play in tune with the open strings. And the accuracy of the fretted note is governed by the distance of the saddle from the frets. So if the fretted note is flat compared to the open string, the saddle's too far back. If the fretted note is sharp, the saddle is too far forward. So on an acoustic, since you can't move it, there's not really much you can do. In extreme cases, some guitars, the saddle is in the wrong place and it will not intonate, and you have to fill the saddle slot and move the saddle, and obviously that's a job for a qualified guitar tech. So I'm just checking to see how close I am on this guitar. So I'm going to have my open string perfectly in tune, then I'm going to check at my 12th fret, and I'm right on the money, just a tiny bit sharp. Here's my A. It's a little bit sharp, not by much. Actually, that's very good. C or D. It's really right on the money. It's great. That intonation is very good. I mean, you would hope it would be, because Martin's only been making guitars for about 150 years, so they've kind of got that down. I used a headstock tuner on this instrument because it does not have a pickup. If your guitar has a pickup in it, which many, many do, just go ahead and use your benchtop strobe tuner, and you'll be able to have the accuracy to check your intonation. Additionally, I checked at the 12th fret. This guitar doesn't have a cutaway. It's hard to play much up beyond the 12th fret. But if you have a cutaway, or you are a person who plays farther up the neck, definitely check your intonation at the 17th fret to make sure that your intonation is good all the way up the fretboard. So hopefully you've seen how our Keep It Simple setup system and gauge sets make it very easy for you to not only take measurements and then make the adjustments needed to have your guitar play and sound great, but it also gives you the ability to diagnose issues on an instrument that may not be playing well for you, or that you may not even be able to make the adjustments on yourself. Maybe you're not equipped to handle modifying the saddle on your guitar, but with the gauge setup, you can check to see, oh yeah, my action height is uneven, or yes, my bridge radius is incorrect. So then you could go down to the shop and know, hey, I need a setup because my action is too high and my bridge radius is off. So if you do the setup yourself, very linear, relief, bridge, nut, done. And if you need a little help, you can find a shop that can work with you and get it done. So after you've gone through the whole setup process, hopefully you'll sit back and crack open whatever you enjoy drinking and spend some time with your guitar and really enjoy the playability and your connection to your instrument that maybe you didn't have if you'd never worked on it before. So they're super fun to play, but I think they're super fun to work on. So that it could open a whole new area of enjoyment for you with your instrument. So most of the setup process we used on this Martin can be used on many other acoustic guitars. This is about as standard acoustic as you're going to get. I mean, it's pretty much a benchmark. So I hope that you've enjoyed watching the video. I really love working on the guitars, and I hope that some of my knowledge and the tool system that we've developed will help you as you learn to work on your own. And thanks a lot for watching. We'll catch you next time.
For detailed videos on how to use each gauge during the setup process, please visit musicnomadcare.com for all our how-to videos.